Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show. Welcome to your Monday edition of the podcast. It's a mailbag. We're going to dive into a lot of questions surrounding what transpired in Lubbock. And we should say, all three of us took different flights, different days getting out to Lubbock, Texas. All three of us bumped into Duck fans. That was really cool to see, whether it was in the airport, whether it was at the game or in the surrounding areas of Lubbock, Texas. We heard from a lot of you guys that went. Always awesome to hear and to see and meet Duck fans who take in our work. And it was just one of those things that it's a reassurance that we're doing a good job here, that we're putting out a product that people enjoy, and it's always good to hear. So a lot of appreciation to all of you who came up to us. Continue to do that. Doesn't bother us at all.
Yeah, I was going to say, I spent a couple hours in the Lubbock airport before my flight and didn't have much to do. There wasn't a lot of TVs available, even though it was the first day of NFL Sunday. Was kind of bummed out, and chatted with a couple folks. People, Scopil Domus, a couple people said as they walked up. So that's great. I really appreciate that. And as Matt said, don't hesitate if you see us to just come say hi, because we do appreciate that. Now, if you're going to tell us our work stinks, well, you can do that too.
You can still do that. That's fine. Yeah, go for it.
Should we jump in?
Yeah.
All right. First one from @ZBGreen1. After reviewing the film, what are Oregon's most glaring weaknesses and points of concerns from a position group perspective? Have these changed for your relative to your opinions from fall camp? To the first one, it's kind of what we talked about to a certain degree in post game. I don't think a lot surprised me. I would say offensively, it was just the offensive line, and the interior had a really rough day, especially on run blocks. You go watch I think it was pretty symptomatic of the day as a whole for Marcus Harper at left guard, the touchdown that gets wiped off on the Jordan James run, where he just gets beat. He has to grab the guy, and that's why the play comes back. And you saw that a decent amount where he just didn't hold up great. I actually thought the tackles were fine, aside from Connerly having some pre-snap problems like that. I thought he had. There are people on the message board that were losing their minds, that were frustrated. This is a former 5-star.
And misspelling his name.
Apparently, Josh Connolly.
Dan Connolly.
He's an Irishman. But I actually thought he played perfectly fine, aside from some of those early pre-snap things, and again, that had to do with the cadence. So to me, it's the interior. And Jackson Johnson was great. I didn't think there was. I think he graded out from PFF just about as well as he and Johnny were the two highest rated offensive linemen, and that kind of that was in line with what I watched. And then I guess defensively, I felt like the linebackers again. That was where some of the issues were on rundowns, especially a couple of those shuck plays where it just seemed like guys were a little slow to react, got caught a little flat-footed. When those guys are attacking and getting upfield, you see what happens, right? I mean, the two of the big turnovers in that game were because linebackers were charging upfield. Jamal Hill gets up there, he forces the fumble, Dorless recovers it. Jeffrey Boss is in position to make that interception because he's charging and following Dorless there, who makes contact for the pick six. So, like when those guys are heading upfield and going and are confident, they make plays. It's just there's some times where they kind of get caught. It seems like kind of waiting, trying to process what's going on. And it makes a little sense with some of those guys because they're converted safeties. Do you disagree, Jared? You didn't see that?
I do.
Saw that quite a bit.
Yeah. I just felt like that was the Texas Tech offense. It was a ton of RPOs. It was trying to catch Oregon's linebackers flat-footed because they just don't know whether to go right after the running back or the quarterback or to sit back and drop into pass coverage. That's what's great about the RPOs. So I think I understand what you're saying where it looked like they were a step slow, but it's because they had to wait to see whether the running back or the quarterback took the ball.
And a really good example of that actually is the touchdown on the slant to Tharp, where it's an RPO read with a slant on behind it, and Brian Addison there is kind of having to wait and see what the read is, and you see him leak out there. And if he's able to make that decision, I'm not saying it's his fault because it's a good offensive skills, but
it's a good offense. Yeah, it's a good play.
If he's able to plant and go a step sooner, he might have picked that off, or he would have been in position to make a play there. Instead, it's a clear passing lane. You got a 6'9" guy against a 5'10" guy, and that's going to be a win every time. So, do we want to get? I think there are positives we can get into too, but maybe we just pass the ball around here and we can talk about other things that stood out from a weakness perspective.
I think it's telling that you look at the PFF grades and Jamal Hill, Evan Williams, Jeffrey Bossa, and Bryce Betcher were all terrible against the run. Whether that's Texas Tech's offense and doing what they're designed, or that's the lack of execution by Oregon's linebackers and safety, the guys that you would think are going to be in play here against the run. It was a combination of both. I think Erik's right in that I don't think these guys played good, and I think Jared's right that Oregon didn't play good, and Texas Tech took advantage of that and went right at it and found something there. And now it's going to be on Dan Lanning and the staff to fix that because opponents are going to replicate that. I got a text from someone in our network, Bud Elliott, last night. We were talking about the game, and he said the blueprint's out now of how to move the ball on Oregon, and it's going to be up to Oregon to kind of adjust and figure it out. But yeah, like the linebackers just weren't good against the run, and that is a concern. That was an issue that Oregon had last season, that they just weren't effective there. Now, the middle of the defense was solid against the pass, and you have to acknowledge that as well. So it's you're going to face some teams that are going to probably go at Oregon's linebackers from a running perspective, whether it's misdirection or it's powered runs that they did with Shuck, or whether it's zone read type stuff.
I really didn't think Oregon's rush D was that bad yesterday. I rewatched the game a couple times, and obviously you get the Shuck, the 58-yarder to start out the game, which totally will impact how the overall numbers look, the stats look, and again, there's the sacks that take away from the rush yardage, which is always really dumb, but that helps. That's in favor of Oregon this time around. I thought it certainly could have been better. I mean, there were moments against Hawaii where it didn't look great on the rush defense and both linebackers and the interior defensive line. But their running backs, they had one good carry, and I still feel like they did their job overall. I thought the linebackers, I mean, when we're comparing this Oregon defense to last year's Oregon defense, I thought the linebackers were night and day better.
I agree.
I thought the overall defense was night and day better. I think
also
Oregon loses the game if it's last year's defense, because despite the longer touchdowns that Texas Tech had, like the 34-yarder to
Bradley
in the right corner of the end zone, like go back and watch that play. It was an awesome play.
Awesome route. Yep.
Yeah. It was a fake wide receiver screen where he's blocking Nico Reed and then throws him aside and runs right past him. It's a beautifully executed play. Like Texas Tech's offense last night, or not last night, but Saturday night was really good. They put everything they had on the field against Oregon's defense, and I thought that they did pretty well. I know the 30 points and the long touchdowns, and I know Tyler Shuck doing it doesn't make it any easier, but in my mind, I thought they played pretty well considering what they were going against. There are certainly areas that they need to improve on. Rush defense is one of them. Communication is one of them. And I think figuring out a rotation that works best for the defensive line is another one. But I think there are, like Erik said, I think there are some positives that came from it. But there's certainly a lot to work on.
I think my point is the defense last year would have lost in the game, but that still doesn't mean it's good enough. And they're going to play way tougher offenses in conference play. USC, Washington, Oregon State is a powerhouse from a running the football type performance, and they need to make marketed big jumps of improvement. Now it's week 2, and you see teams make the better teams in college football gradually get better. And so you have to acknowledge that. Like, I'm not sitting here saying it's doom and gloom. It's only week 2. They're going to get better. I know that. But they're going to play way better offenses than what they saw against Texas Tech. And those teams are going to have way better players on their rosters. And if they perform like they did week 2 against a USC or against a Washington, they are going to lose, and they aren't going to lose by one score. It could get ugly if they play like that consistently, I think.
Well, it's actually funny, Matt, because this question is framed about negative stuff. After watching the film, I actually felt really good about a lot of things that I didn't feel good about at the stadium.
I agree.
So this question was kind of framed negatively. Maybe we shouldn't have started here. Like, if I was going to start like what my film review was, it was like there were some young guys that were awesome. Like Oregon nailed the outside linebacker class this year, and those guys are already ready to play and are already, like, frankly, better than Mace Funa and better than, I mean, Jake Shipley is, not to be too that's not a high bar to clear necessarily, but like it's pretty clear who Oregon's best outside linebacker guys are right now, and it's primarily the young guys. It's primarily those true freshmen who I thought played really well. Jaleel Florence, that was awesome. I thought he was fantastic out there.
He was really good.
Freshman. He played 59 snaps. He handled himself really, really well. Like the one coverage bust, if you will, came on that wonky trick play, which again, I think that's good Texas Tech offense. That's hard to prepare for. You like the quarterback, it gets hands it off, ball comes back, he throws it down the field. Like that's how many times do we see teams defend that perfectly? Like, not often. Like those are hard plays to defend. So is the defense need to get better? Absolutely. To Matt's point, there definitely need to be improvements. Dan came out and said exactly that. And I think the big thing that was frustrating for me was not as much what happened on plays where there weren't flags, but what happened on plays where there were flags, because those were the instances where I think
they panicked.
The panic came through. And I want to say on Twitter, I suggested in the moment that the Kyrie Jackson play was like maybe a necessary pass interference. Having watched it again, he just lost track of the ball and saw a guy downfield and tried to destroy him
and took him out.
If he has a better idea of where the ball is, he could have picked that off. That wasn't a particularly good throw. Those things need to be worked on. I do agree with Matt that the linebacker play needs to get better. Tech also deserves a lot of credit, I think, for creating some of those situations. Any more reactions? We talked about linebackers and offensive line because that's where I started. Did you guys?
Well, I think your comment about like the outside linebacker edge types from a recruiting perspective is spot on, because Mateo and Tatum Tuioti have basically become equals with Jordan Birch from a playing time standpoint. They're used almost all the same, from the snap count totals, nearly the same. Blake Purchase is probably in that group as well, just a little bit behind it. And I don't know if any of us would have thought that going in. And it feels like Birch is only really in there on passing downs too. Like when he's out there, they're anticipating pass. They're not thinking he's, it's going to be a run play. But I'm with you. I think Mateo has looked really good, and then Tuioti playing as much as he did week 2. He didn't play week 1 because of injury, but playing how much he, in that setting against that opponent in his first game, that's a pretty big deal, I think. And Huffman was on the show this time last year, maybe a little later in the year, saying like, if his last name wasn't Tuioti and he didn't play his first 3 years of high school football in Nebraska and then his 4th year in Eugene, Oregon, he probably would have been a bigger name, because everyone just assumed he was going wherever dad was coaching, because that's just the combination that seemed natural. And that's coming true, where this is a dude and he's probably going to be a better player than some expected, because they just felt, oh, coach's kid, he'll be talented, but don't count on him right away.
I also have some outside linebacker thoughts, but there's a question directly correlating to that later in the show, so I'm going to wait on that.
Okay. And then do we want to touch on have things changed relative to our opinions of fall camp? I think the answer to that's just always going to be yes, because we saw so little in fall camp, really.
Yeah, I think my worries are similar. I think it's like Matt said, there's going to be tougher tests down the road, starting with Colorado in week 4. And you'll really get a good idea. I think you got a much better idea of how this defense performs, which was my biggest question mark going into the season. You've got a much better idea of that after Saturday. There were just an incomprehensible amount of mistakes by Oregon on Saturday that were rather surprising. So I think that's something that that's kind of changed my perspective from fall camp in that category, because Portland State didn't have, I think they had like 1 or maybe 2 penalties total. Racking up 14 is a different story. And 6 of those directly led to Texas Tech first downs. Like there were a lot of things where it's like, if Oregon had played their game, I think the score would have been much different, and not have made so many mistakes, but it wasn't, and they made the mistakes. So to come out of Texas Tech with a victory was key. But I think my issues coming out of fall camp are still pretty much what they are today.
move on to number 2 in a second, but a quick aside. The Wyoming Portland State game was a lot more close than I thought it would be, given how both those teams performed
Mhm.
against competition week 1. That was 31-17, which I only saw, I think, Sunday morning as I was getting up. Surprised it was that competitive. All right, second one, at Duck Fan Dan. Is our offense less dynamic than it was most of last season? It could be beginning of the year gelling or the new offensive line, but I'm worried that Stein won't be as good as Kenyon was until he got the ASU job. Hashtag Autzen Audibles. You guys, I don't know if everybody will agree on this. I think this reminds me a lot of when RPOs became really popular in football, and everyone would be like, "Why are you calling so many run plays? You guys ran it so much." And it's like, well, there's a pass option to it. Like, I saw Bo take a lot of checkdowns. I saw tons of options downfield that he took the check down, and that's totally fine a lot of the time. I think a couple times he might have missed guys,
Mhm.
but I didn't think it was an offensive like that was like necessarily less dynamic. I just think they didn't take the shots downfield aside from the obvious one to Troy early in the game.
Right.
Um, I liked some of the run game stuff. I think they got a little too reliant on inside stuff on short yardage, but when they pitched it outside behind those tackles, it was great. We saw probably more of that on Saturday than we have in several years. And I should note in rewatch, I noticed that they scored a couple of those as passes instead of runs, which is probably kind of skews some of that rushing totals we talked about after the game, where we were frustrated and or at least concerned or maybe uncertain of why they didn't run it better. Like Noah Whittington has a pitch for 25 yards that goes down as a
As a
pass
pass,
because he's
yeah.
slightly ahead of Bo, which if that counts as a run, that juices up the totals. And I think Bucky might have had one, or Jordan definitely had one. So um, I'm not going to say don't be concerned or that Will is everything that Kenny was, because I hold Kenny Dillingham in extremely high esteem. I think he's probably the best offensive coordinator Oregon has had since, making sure I'm going through, I'm not forgetting anybody, but probably since Chip Kelly was here in terms of just an offensive mind. I think Kenny is awesome. I think he'll do well at Arizona State once he gets players. So I'm not ready to like say Will is better. So maybe they are slightly less dynamic or the offensive play calling has taken a slight step back, but I don't come away, especially on rewatch, thinking, "Oh man, that was terrible. What awful play calling." I don't know. Do you guys agree with that, or were you guys as concerned as it seems like some of these questions are?
No, I agree with you. I think a lot of it is circumstances as well. We've talked about the penalties. Like that puts Will Stein in a tough position. Like
That's
you
a good
saw
point.
some
Yep.
of like the early drives of the game where Oregon didn't have any major penalties. Like and they just went down the field and did all these little creative things. Like I don't know, they did like to Trayshawn Hold on the left side of the end zone, that fake wide
Mhm.
receiver screen to go up top. Those were nice. Like, but the thing about checkdowns is it's not pretty. It's not the sexy play. It's not throwing it deep. But what it allows an offense to do is get a couple yards. Like, and we saw Bo Nix get some pressure, scramble out, and drill his check down across the field, and someone would scoot up 6 or 7 yards. That's a hell of a lot better than throwing a ball in jeopardy and throwing it over the middle and trying to make a big play out of something. Like it's just it's clean, it's fundamental football, and it's not fun at all. Like I get that.
Mhm.
But there were still good plays. There were still the deep balls like Detroit Franklin. Upon further review, like I do think Bo Nix missed a couple of deep shots,
Yep.
and maybe that's something that just happened in the heat of the moment, and Bo felt the pressure and didn't even look up and went to his check down and got a couple yards, which is fine. Like I'm not like Bo Nix was great on Saturday against Texas Tech. Like he's fine, but there were a couple missed shots and he didn't even throw the ball. And maybe he connects on two of those because I think there were like 4 or 5 total where it's like, well, that might have been a ball that he could have thrown deep, but maybe he connects on two of those next game, and all of a sudden it's two more touchdowns or an extra 60 to 80 yards in total offense. Like, I don't think Oregon's play calling was conservative. I think that if they wanted to run the ball more, they would have. But Texas Tech's interior line, like Erik mentioned, did a really good job against Oregon's interior offensive line and made it very difficult to run between the tackles. They had to go outside the tackles, and once Texas Tech realized that they were only going to go outside the tackles, then they put their defense to say, "Hey, cover outside the tackles." And so it kind of put Will Stein and the rushing attack into a bind. And that's what good defenses do. But good offenses adjust. They have little checkdowns. They have fake wide receiver screens. They have real wide receiver screens. They have halfback screens. They do all these different ways to simulate the running attack. And so I think there were some moments where it was conservative, but I think that's just kind of nitpicky. I think that overall, I'm not worried about the offense. They still put up almost 500 yards of offense and scored 38 or 31 points. Like I think they'll be okay.
There's not much more to say other than the fact that Bo Nix, I agree with Jared, that there were opportunities missed. He had Kenyon Sadiq and Casey Kelly wide open for touchdowns that he went to the other receivers on checkdowns. He went to he missed a Tez Johnson across the middle. Don't know if it would have been a touchdown. Certainly was in play for one, but it would have been a huge gain.
Yep.
And he went to Troy Franklin, which ended up being, I think, a catch. But and these are just nitpicking things. These are the grand scheme of things, like Jared said, they still put up over 500 yards of total offense. And the check down thing, like, it's 100% something they should be doing, because who are Oregon's best playmakers with the ball in their hand?
Bucky Irving,
running backs.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 guys that you come up with. It's Bucky Irving and it's probably Troy Franklin. Those are probably the 2 guys that you say, we need you to get 7 yards and we need you to make someone miss. And those are the 2 names that you're going to throw out probably first in that order: Bucky, and then Troy, and then probably Noah Whittington would be the 3rd one. And those are all the checkdowns. Those are the targets that they go to. It's literally just Bo saying, I'm trusting I'm going to get 1 yard on this throw, and I'm trusting that Bucky Irving is going to make a defender miss. Or like, what have we said since last season? That Bucky Irving never goes backwards on a hit. He always falls forward. Mm-hmm. It's very rare that he falls backwards on a tackle. And all of Oregon's running backs on these checkdowns and on the runs and everything, they initiate contact, they fall forward, and they always make sure, instead of getting stuffed and stonewalled like Tyler Shuck did on that 4th down where he gets 0 yards or gets pushed back, they always fall forward. And so it's Oregon just basically saying, we trust our playmaker, our best playmaker, to make someone miss and turn a 2-yard catch into a 6 or a 7-yard catch. And I think a big chunk of, I wish I could find this in the stat broadcast, but second quarter when they struggled and the third quarter when they struggled, I'd be really curious to know what the success rate was when they got positive yards on first down and they were ahead of schedule going into second down. And then you go and you look at the drives where they had a false start or they had some kind of holding penalty and they faced a 1st and 15 or what have you. And then they faced a 2nd and 8 or a 2nd and 10. And they're behind schedule. And I would be really curious to go and look at the pass to run differentials between those drives too, of when they got a snap off on first down without committing a penalty, a self-inflicted wound, or they were able to pull off the play. I bet you a lot of those were probably more runs than passes. They probably ran the ball more on first down than second down, which then gives you an opportunity when you're in second down to take shots, to be aggressive, go play action, because on third down, it's only 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4. You can get that with a run or some kind of quick pass. So I'm not concerned about the offense. I'm not concerned about the offensive play calling. I think it's really good. I think Kenny Dillingham was a home run hire for Oregon last season. And like Erik said, of one of the better coordinators we've had at Oregon in a long time. But to sit here and complain that Will Stein isn't doing a good job, that he's not good, this offense has major issues. I know that's not what the question said, but I saw that narrative out there on the site and on Twitter during the game. It's just stupid. The offense is fine. They put up almost 600 yards on the road against Tech when they played about a C+ performance, in my opinion, in that game.
And I guess just the last thing I'd say on the check down versus throwing downfield element. Big reason why Oregon won this game? The turnover battle.
Yeah.
And if Nix throws the ball over the middle of the field a bunch rather than taking the check down, and he forces it. And I'm not saying there weren't instances where he had wide open players that wouldn't be forcing it. But if he's forcing it down there, that's where you see turnovers happen, right? That's where two of Tyler Shuck's turnovers happened down the middle of the field, or at least down the field. One of them was to Kyrie, I guess, past the right hash. But that's where problems happen. So If we were recording this podcast today and Bo Nix had thrown more of those down the field and a couple of them picked off and Oregon had lost the game, we'd be having a different conversation that would also be critical.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into the second half of the podcast. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. 2 questions in. We've got 3 more to go around what's probably basically all Oregon football, which it should be right now.
It's going to be all Oregon football.
Yeah.
We don't even need to say that anymore, Matt. It's going to be that way all fall. I think maybe we'll have a mailbag when basketball season starts. It's just basketball, but this is going to be football.
No, we're not going to have that.
No,
it's going to be
we probably won't.
No.
I shouldn't even introduce that possibility because that's not happening. All right. Third one from @JamesonWhite16. I think this is a new question asker, so thanks for asking, Jameson. Small sample size, but tackling felt improved from last year. Did anybody impress you in that area? Did you feel like we could be in better position pre-snap? He also has a second question, but we'll get to that one after this one. I did think tackling, for the most part, has been better than it started last year, but that's setting the bar very low because against Georgia last year, I actually don't. I wish I pulled this up on PFF. Do you guys remember what the total was? Wasn't it like 35 or 40 missed tackles?
For missed tackles?
Something
No,
silly
but I can
against
go
Georgia.
look it up real quick.
Yeah, take a look because I was going to contrast that just to Saturday where they missed 9 tackles all game, which is, you want to have those back. Brian Addison missed 3, Evan Williams missed 3, and if you go back and watch those missed tackles by Evan, some of those were
sort of
20.
costly.
It's 20. Okay, so I was a little bit hyperbolic. It felt like that many in my head, but still 20 is a rather large number for a single football game. But it was 9. So if fans thought 9 felt like a lot compared to 20 last year, it's definitely improved. And I should also acknowledge last year, and this surprised me when I was looking kind of back at what PFF said last year, Oregon finished the season, at least based on PFF grades, as the 15th best tackling team in the country, which I don't think any of us felt when we were watching them play. But as the year went on, it definitely got better. They're definitely starting at a better place this year. If we want to talk about the best tackling grades on the team, because that is a thing that PFF tracks, and that's sort of the question. Top 5 on the team, according to PFF, were Tyshim Johnson, Tatum Tuioti, Jaleel Florence, Jamal Hill, and Steve Stevens. Tyshim had kind of an up and down game in terms of some coverage stuff, but that guy in the open field is a stud, and that's exactly what you need there. Not that they were terrible, as we said a second ago, last year in some of those areas, but Tyshim is an upgrade. I know there were some fans who were frustrated about a couple of those plays. I think we've already maybe talked about the one touchdown where he was caught a little flat-footed. Guy beats him on like a corner route to the end zone. He was also matched up on like a 7-foot person one time, which is just like, good luck. Go try to defend that. See what you can do. I thought he played pretty darn well for the most part. I don't know, Jared, was there anybody on rewatch that I didn't mention maybe that you stood out that had made some big plays in open field? Because I'm trying to think if there's anybody for me.
It wasn't. No, I don't really think that there was another guy to mention in terms of open field tackling. Evan Williams, Tyshim Johnson did well. I know Evan had a couple missed tackles, but like one of those missed tackles was a really good play where like he comes down on a run commit from the second level and breaks through the offensive line, makes them miss, and then hits the guy. He just doesn't bring him down. Like he showed what he can do in the open field. What I thought was really good about Oregon's defense in terms of their tackling was a lot of it were multiple hats in the ball, like 2 guys, 3 guys at a time. Something that had kind of been missing from last year's defense, where they were all like a step slow in getting to whoever had the football. I thought that they played faster on that end, and I think that's why the tackling was better. So they just had multiple guys, multiple hats on the ball. I don't have anybody specific. I think I thought Oregon did a much better job in general of wrapping up the quarterback. I thought that was a huge problem last year. I have stats to prove it, but we're going to save that for a different opportunity. Like Mateo had one big miss, even though he had an outstanding move to get to the quarterback. He still missed Chuck. But I think in general, I thought that they were much better just bringing down the quarterback, whether that was one-on-one or it was a gang tackle. Like I thought they were just better at that.
So Evan Williams' comment about being a more feared and respected defense this season than, that one of the things he talked about was everyone rallying to the football and finishing off plays collectively. And to Jared's point, like we saw more of that this game. We saw, like I think of I've mentioned it a bunch of times in different scenarios, but the fourth down stop, like it wasn't just a linebacker plugging the hole. It was 2 or 3 guys getting to the play and finishing it off. The Jamal Hill hit. Those are plays where there's more than 1 or 2 guys around the football. When that fumble happened, there was like 3 Ducks trying to pick it up. And, like those are the things on film that don't show up on the stat sheet. There's no credit that goes around for that, but you're wanting to see dudes flying to the football, and we're seeing it. And that's where when a guy does miss a tackle, it doesn't really get impacted all that much because your team is in position to make the play. And missed tackles are going to happen, but what you don't want are missed tackles in one-on-one scenarios in the open field, because that's when big plays can happen. That's when a 12-yard play could turn into a 40-yard play, or a 2-yard play can turn into a first down. And Oregon has done a pretty good job of rallying to the ball and making sure they don't, allow a ton of explosive plays. Tech had a lot of them. They had, I think, 14 explosive plays in that game last night or 2 nights ago. 10 or more rushing yards or 15 or more passing yards. But a lot of it was just good offense making plays. There were a couple of them that Oregon missed tackles or just was out of position, but their ability to rally the football is the big thing that sticks out to me.
Yeah, I mean, the probably the one missed tackle that is most prevalent in my mind, at least, is the Kyrie Jackson miss right towards the end of the game there that allows the receiver to get like an extra 8 yards. But that was like one of the very few. And then there was the long rush by Brooks where there were a lot of guys around the ball, and that guy gets ahead of steam at like 225 pounds. He's just hard to take down. And then my last thought here, just to the point you guys made on the gang tackling, 58 total tackles recorded by Oregon, and 16 of those were assisted tackles. So to your point, a lot of hats on the ball on several of those. Second part to Jameson's question, we'll keep this quick because we want to get to the last two. Is this a case of a really good team win when they play poorly, or is there deeper issues? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. I think it's the former. I think we've kind of already established that we feel that way. I personally think we're going to learn a lot more against Colorado, but I don't think we need to change expectations. Oregon's 2-0. They won on the road and they won a game.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. I think it was a really sloppy win, but a win's a win. And I think if you're Dan and you're like all the coaching staff, you clearly have a lot of things to work on, but you're not dwelling on it. You're moving on. You have conquered that challenge of going on the road and winning. And now they have Hawaii this week and Colorado next week.
I don't need to say more.
Okay. I figured we were all going to do that, which is why I wanted just to breeze through that one. All right. Fourth one, and I'm just going to read the snap counts and just send it to Jared because I know he's got some thoughts here. But from @Bigfoot8801, noting the play count, Mateo outsnapped Birch. Seems significant, if not injury related, especially given the snaps at edge given to Purchase and Tatum. Who is the alpha in that room right now? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. And I'm just, like I said, I'm going to read the snap counts and then I'll let Jared, because I know he's got some thoughts on this. But in terms of the snaps, Mateo did play more than any of the players we just read. He played 36 snaps. Birch played 29. Tuioti played 26. I guess they've adjusted it a little bit because I think it was 25 when I looked yesterday. And then Purchase and Funa played about the same number, 14 for Funa, 12 for Purchase, 13 for Winston, I guess we should note. And Jake Shipley played 9 snaps. So those are kind of the guys in that group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if it's major concerns. Like, I understand that Birch was the high-profile transfer, and you want him to do well, or you expect him to do well, and this defense provides him an opportunity to do so. And it's not like he's doing nothing out there. The problem is when you look at the stat sheet at the end of the day, like his name isn't really there. I think he had. Let me pull up the stats in front of me here from the game on Saturday. Like,
he didn't have a stat.
He didn't have a stat, and Mateo had 3 tackles, almost had a sack. I think PFF actually credited him with a sack, but that obviously was like the play where they took the penalty instead of taking the sack. Like, he's still making an impact. He's still making it difficult for the offensive line on the opposing team. He's still getting to the quarterback. He's just not producing at a level that you would hope and expect him to do so. The other side of this is like, it's not a problem because Mateo's good.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing if, you would really expect Birch to come in and do something, and then Mateo isn't doing anything. Like, Mateo, I think, to me, is certainly exceeding expectations on what I expected him to be this year. I expected him to be a contributor and get on the field, probably just on third down is what I talked about most during the fall camp. Like, third and long, like, hey, Mateo, you're young, you're fast, you're lean. Like, go, like Kayvon Thibodeau when he was a freshman. Like, go run after the quarterback on third and long. But he's out there a lot. I mean, that was his 36 total play count. Like, that was 10th on the team. Like, that's a lot, and that's a lot more than a bunch of other defensive linemen. So I don't know if it's concerning yet. Birch will have his moment. Mateo will have his moment. I think that's just good defensive line depth. I don't think it's concerning at all. And the edge, the Tatum, Blake Purchase, Jake Shipley, Mace Funas of the world. I think, like, to Eric's point earlier, like, I think it's clear that they feel better about who their true freshmen are than some guys who are returning. I also think that Texas Tech's offense was not really great to just line up outside linebackers who can't jump into pass coverage or who can't really run around the field like Mace Funa, like Jake Shipley. Like, when Funa and Shipley were on the field, that's where Texas Tech attacked. And when Tatum was on the field and he was in pass coverage, that's where Texas Tech attacked. But I thought it was really surprising that Tatum Tuioti played as often as he did. I thought that was a huge sub-storyline for me, if there could be such a thing as a big little thing. Because, he doesn't play in week one. We don't really see him in fall camp. We heard nice things about him in the spring. We heard nice things about him in the first week or two of fall camp. But then goes down with an injury. It looked like it might be a kind of a serious injury or something. Yeah. Crutches on at some point. Like, we're like, oh, well, that's not great. But I didn't really have an expectation of what he would be as an outside linebacker. But I thought he played pretty well. I thought he was in on a lot of tackles. I thought he held up well in his first college game. You could tell he's probably not 100%, but it's certainly not like he's 50% and out there playing. Like, he looked good. He looked athletic. Purchase is somebody who hasn't, I don't even know if he's recorded a stat in either of the two games he's played, but he gets significant roles out there. So I think, to answer the final question of this, like, who is the alpha in that room right now? It's still Birch. Like, he's still the most experienced dude. He still has the pedigree of being a 5-star and playing at South Carolina and doing all these things there and coming in here as the number one recruit in Oregon's transfer portal class. Like, he's still the alpha, but he's got to go out and prove it. I think at one point during the season, it might be Hawaii. He might get 8 sacks against Hawaii. Who knows? But I know, right? But
would love that.
It would be fun. But Mateo's certainly making a name for himself, and it's been impressive to watch him, especially on the replays of, like, watching the film. But I don't think it's a concern. I think Birch is still the alpha there.
I don't know if that's going to be the case by the end of the year, though.
Sure, Mateo, and if it's not, that's great.
Yeah. Mateo's really good. I mean, I've said my piece about Tatum. He's very good as well. He's impressing. And I think there's more depth than expected. And maybe that's the way to put it. And they just have to get guys on the field.
The only thing I would just add to this conversation is with Funa and pass coverage, I would just say stop. Like, he's just not. It's just it's a problem. Like, just rush him. He's good when he's getting upfield and rushing the passer. Like, that's where he's had his best plays in his career at Oregon. I mean, even I guess technically his best play was the interception he had where he was kind of in coverage where he leaked out and picked off a screen pass. But when he's running downfield, and you saw it on one of the pass interference calls, he's just it's tough for him. It's not optimal for his body type or his athleticism for him to be out in space like that. When he's heading upfield, he can make things happen. But it's notable he didn't play a ton, and he didn't play in the opener. I don't know if we have no idea on injury or health if that's playing a role here, or if it's just a case of, like, hey, some of these young guys are are making a name, or if it's just certain personnel packages where they're not featured as much because of matchups. It's hard to know these sort of things. Now, that's also the other part to the play count is how much of this is just matchup related. And maybe next week we'll look up and go, oh, wow, Birch played 65 snaps and Mateo played 23, and it's a much different picture. We'll see.
I think Mateo's their best pass rusher right now.
Besides Dorless,
Over Dorless?
You might be like
yes. From this group that we're talking about, Dorless is their best defensive player. I think their best pass rusher from this subgroup of players, it's Mateo.
Mm-hmm.
We probably haven't even talked enough about how good Dorless was on rewatch. Like, he was a game wrecker. I mean, because again, the stat sheet doesn't even tell half the story with him, and that was the case last year. Because remember, I don't have the figures here, but Jared, you might remember how many pressures he had, even though I think he only had 3 or 4 sacks all season. I think he still had one of the highest
42.
He had like one of the highest pressure rates
total pressures,
for an interior lineman in the Pac-12, and I think it was like pretty decent compared to some of the other conferences too. All right, we're going to end it with this one, and I'm wondering if this is going to be a little redundant to what we just talked about. So my bad if it is, but from @541 Ducks, are we subbing too many guys on defense? I'm sure Dan knows better than all of us, but it seems a bit weird seeing the likes of Shipley and Winston playing more than anticipated in key periods of the game, especially with added depth at those spots. Shipley and Winston didn't play that much in this game. I think I read it earlier. I think it's 22 combined snaps. And part of me thinks the reason those guys played as much as they did in the opening game, and again, some of this might just be their personnel packages that lend themselves more to them, and they opened in one of those. But I think the absence of Tuioti, the absence of Funa provided an opportunity for those guys to play a ton in the opener. They didn't play a lot on Saturday. And when they were out there, it wasn't fantastic. Again, Shipley has a hard time athletically, similar kind of conversation to Funa. I think both those guys are tweeners, basically, where it's like, should they be putting a hand down? Should they be shedding weight and trying to play outside linebacker? And it's like neither of it's perfect. Doesn't really work entirely. So they're just trying to find roles for these guys. I don't know if they're subbing too many players. Like, I'm just looking at the total here. They played 26 players on defense on Saturday. About 20 of them played 20 snaps or more. And then there's a bunch of guys who played far fewer than that, or fewer than that, I should say. Like, I didn't get a feel like it was causing problems, but I don't know. It's also the Texas heat where it was like 90 degrees, and you probably want to be careful with playing a guy like every snap out there.
100% what it was.
You know?
100%.
So I don't know if I'm super concerned. I think Matt clearly agrees. Jared, do you have any other thoughts on this?
My thoughts are pretty simple. It's very hard to sub too many guys when you're playing a defense and you're playing in college football. Like, you want as many people as you can that you have confidence in. It's a key word there, to get onto the field and get your guys fresh reps. Like, the reason Brandon Dorless was able to come in and wreak havoc towards the end of the game was that he had legs. He had strength in his legs, and he had like stamina still left in him to go after Shuck at the final end of the game. And I had been preaching about this all fall camp, is that Oregon probably feels like they have enough dudes on the defensive line and I guess elsewhere that they can run in situational packages and they can run guys in and out of the lineup. Like, the depth compared to last season where they had to rely on Brandon Dorless every single down, or DJ Johnson, or whoever it was on the defensive line last year, like, that's not a thing this year. Like, if they want to take Dorless off, they can just move Jordan Birch to the inside and let him go there. Like, that's such a huge upgrade compared to what it was last year, where you took Brandon Dorless off, and sorry, but you put Trevin Mai on. Like, that's a clear upgrade. So I think that plays into it. I don't think that they're subbing too many guys. I think the outside linebacker thing is something to monitor, something to keep an eye on, just in terms of what is the rotation there. And I think it's a lot of like personnel packages, because for the most part, like, all those outside linebackers, except for Tatum, got into the game. Like, they played all under like 15 snaps. Like, they were just out there in little spurts, little spurts. Out of 79 total snaps, 15 of them, that's not a lot of playing time. Like, Tatum was the only dude to get out there. So I think that moving everybody out is because they have the personnel now to do it, and the Texas heat, and they don't have to worry about the red shirt rule. So we'll see in game 5 what it really looks like, because then the red shirt will come into effect. But I don't think it's going to look too much different than what it does now.
I view this as they're just keeping guys fresh. When they can substitute, they're gonna take the opportunity if it makes sense to do that. They're not just throwing guys out there in hockey lines, but if they've got the ability to keep players fresh for the second half, they're gonna do that. I'd be curious to know the snap counts, or the times that Shipley and Winston played. I would think, just from my hypothesis would be, they played in the first half and find 22 snaps for a Mateo and a Birch and a Tatum to save for the next, in the second half, when you want your best players out there and you keep them fresh just because of the heat. I mean, it was hot, but they've been in heat before. But this is also like, what do we see in the month of September, the first few weeks of the year across college football, not just at Oregon? We see guys cramp. We see the conditioning issues. We see teams that are in shape. And, I think Oregon's just doing everything they can that makes sense to prevent that stuff from happening in the fourth quarter, so that you don't have to pull a guy off because he's completely gassed or because he's battling cramps and you need your best player on the field.
I actually had one thought, because Jared brought up the red shirt thing. Are we thinking that Tuioti purchase and Mateo? I mean, Mateo is obviously not redshirting, and I think Tatum's not redshirting, even though he's only played one game. Purchase, like, do we agree? I think all three of those guys are going to play over the 4-game minimum or maximum.
I think the line is. I think the line should be 2.5. It's probably one of those easy ones where you take the over.
Yeah, I agree. And I just to, I guess, recap the freshmen who played, I will say, and I'll say who it is first, and then I'll make an addendum to what we saw out there. Offensively, it was Sadiq and Pancho were the only true freshmen who got in the game. We've run through those three defensive players. Terrence Green, Cole Martin also were in the participation chart. Jared said post-game he didn't think he saw Terrence Green play. I had I don't know if it's a family member or somebody who just is familiar with Terrence reach out to me and say that he did not play. And
I forgot to say this off air with us yesterday. Nate, Oregon's SID, texted me while I was in transit saying he did not play. They were getting him removed from the participation chart.
Perfect. Okay, just wanted to get that one out there. And then Luke Dunn, also the punter, got in there and had his first punt of the season. So that was the list. So 7 true freshmen played, not 8. And I'll go in there and make adjustments for the story I posted Sunday, when the participation chart reflected that Green did play, which we were all a little bit skeptical of at the time anyway.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for submitting the questions. We really appreciate it. We'll be back later this week with more recaps from Dan's Monday night press conference and Tuesday's interviews with players. We'll have hopefully someone on that covers the Hawaii Rainbows to come on the show to preview this game, and then we'll make our game picks later on this week as well. Until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.